64K retro gaming goodness.
Hey, Bastish B here for 64K and welcome to episode 23 of Pop Culture Quick Bytes. And welcome back. So on today's episode we're going to be having a look at the Zzap 64 2021 annual. This was funded by a successful Kickstarter in 2020 and it's released through Fusion Retro Books. So this is the third Zzap annual that's been released in the last few years, starting with 2019, 2020 and obviously 2021. So I recently did a video on the Zzap 64 magazine that's just released, so if you're interested, please check that out. I also got to speak with Chris Wilkins, the editor of both the magazine and the annual, and we're going to ask him a few questions as we go through this, as well as Mark Hallowell, aka Judge Drokk, who wrote one of my favorite articles in this annual. But first, let's take a look at this awesome Oliver Frey front cover in a little bit more detail. And here's this excellent new Oliver Frey piece of artwork. It's absolutely amazing. It just looks so awesome. And on the back here is an advert for Microprose, the new Microprose. This advert blew me away. I can't wait to check out some of these games that are coming in 2021. Super cool. And yeah, it's just a bunch of Kickstarter bonus stuff I got with it. The massive Oliver Frey poster here. And I also got a sampler for the first issue of the magazine. See, it's 0p there. And also this awesome calendar here. They wisely chose to make it 2022. Otherwise we would have missed the first few cool pages. And yeah, it's just full of great artwork. So I'm not going to go through this annual in every single page. I want there to be some sort of mystery when you actually get it, if you decide to get it. It's hardcover, top quality, pages and prints. Excellent. And I asked Chris Wilkins how long it actually takes to put one of these annuals together.
I think each one we've done has probably taken a slightly different amount of time to do, but the average, I guess, is probably about 3 to 4 months. There's quite a number of people working on the annuals, but obviously they've got day jobs, so a lot of these guys are doing their features, doing their reviews part-time in the evenings. So yeah, I think about maybe 3 to 4 months to do the content, the features, the reviews and all the bits that go with that. And then obviously you've got the cover as well to consider. Ollie probably takes about 3 to 4 months as well to do a cover. It's amazing really that back in the day these guys used to dish out sort of Crash, Zzap and Antics in a month, and Ollie would do the art for each of those covers and also bits and pieces of art within the issues. But yeah, in this current time and current day and age we do take a little bit longer to get one of these annuals out.
And this annual clocks in at 120 pages, so it is just jam-packed with Commodore 64 reviews, obviously all from over the last decade or so, obviously really new ones as well that have just recently come out over the last couple of months. Obviously none of these games were reviewed in the original Zzap 64 magazine because that was defunct in the early 90s, so this is like a fresh slate of C64 reviews. So just like the recently released Zzap magazine, you're going to find all your favorite columns here from back in the day. You know, you got Zzap Rap, Dear Diary, the adventure section. So if you really love that old style Zzap, then you're going to feel right at home with this annual. So I asked Chris something I've always been curious about, whether these annuals or magazines would ever get made if it wasn't for the help of Kickstarter.
I guess not. The Kickstarter was a bit of a revelation when it came to the UK, so I've used that many times now over the years for different books and different projects, so it helps me gauge really if the idea I have, there's an audience out there for that idea. I'm taking Crash first to Kickstarter just to see if there was an audience for these old magazines currently in the retro scene. It was a good test and it proved very popular, so doing Zzap seemed to be the logical thing to do next. And Zzap, the scene obviously, is the reception Zzap's had within the scene has been equally as good. Kickstarter has helped, the audience is there now. We're obviously doing the magazines at the moment, which we're sort of marketing through the reach we currently have, not taking those to Kickstarter, but yeah, Kickstarter has been a great sort of a way of getting the word out there.
So obviously Zzap 64 is known for Commodore 64 reviews, and I think they've managed to round up a nice collection of video game reviewers. All these guys are in the Zzap magazine as well to keep the consistency the same. You've got reviewers from back in the day, the 80s and early 90s, that used to work on Zzap and various other magazines. You got YouTuber Perry Fractic is in here to mix it up a little bit. Chris Wilkins also does reviews in here as well. So I think it's a nice broad perspective. Having said that, let's jump in and check out just a couple of these reviews.
And here's a review for Endless Forms Most Beautiful. This made my top 10 list of 2019 release games. It's quite excellent. And Frogger Arcade there on the left came out in 2016 by Hokuto Force. I still haven't got to play that. I seriously have to. And of course Attic Attack, super excellent game. Remake of the Spectrum game. They got Julian Rignall there to come in and give his 2 cents on the game as well. He was a former Zzap editor and reviewer. And you can see they still got the Sizzler going, all the usual stuff. Any game over 90% gets a Sizzler.
So one of the coolest aspects in this new annual is the one-shot articles. I really love those. So let's jump in and check a few of them out.
This is a cool feature on the Bitmap books, games that weren't. Lots of games that were unreleased. This is a very cool article by Andrew Fisher about Reset 64's 4K Craptastic Festival, where people send in their 4K games and see who has the best one. And here's a making of Arcade Days. This game was by Trevor Story, Stuart Collier. It's to coincide with the release of this annual. I can't wait to play this game. Here's Andrew Braybrook in his own words. It's a blowout on the programmer himself. And this is a pretty cool little article by Max Hall about the Sid Chip Club, a successful Kickstarter that has Sid tunes on vinyl and cartridge.
And one of my personal favorite segments in this whole annual is this massive interview with Anthony Crowther, the programmer, by Mark Halliwell. If you don't know who Mark is, I got to speak to him, and I'll let him introduce himself in his own words.
Hi, I'm Mark Halliwell, known in Commodore circles as Judge Drokk. I formed a short-lived but fun Commodore 64 cracking team in 1987 called the Infiltrators. We were only around for a year, but I learned a hell of a lot in this time and took that forwards in 1988 when I formed the Amiga team Anarchy, which reached the #1 voted team spot at the end of 92 into 93. The group broke up suddenly in the spring of 93 and I disappeared into the wilderness for over 20 years. And then out of the blue I was contacted by Anthony and Nicola Caulfield, the creators of the Bedrooms to Billions movie that looked at the history of the UK games industry in the 1980s. They were making a follow-up film about the next evolutionary step, the Amiga, and wanted me to appear in the film to speak about the demo scene. This sort of later led to a conversation with Chris Wilkins of Fusion Retro Books, who was planning the Amiga in Pixels book, for which I wrote a 12-page history of Anarchy. Shortly afterwards, a historical photograph of myself and Jeff Minter taken in the 1980s was spotted by a guy called Cohen de Brabander. He was making a nostalgic book about growing up with the Commodore 64 in the 1980s, and he asked if I'd like to take part. Well, those 3 loosely connected events took me right back to the 80s and early 90s, and I rediscovered what I loved about these times, and I've decided to stay around.
And here it is, Rat Rap, the full interview with Anthony Crowther. This artwork was done by one of Mark's friends. You can see he's got characters there, the Griffin and William Wobbler, and a whole bunch of Anthony's games. Here is some more of his games. I forgot how many he's actually made. There's the Great Suicide Express and my personal favorite, Loco. And over here we can see Mark and Anthony himself meeting him a few years back. And I honestly did not know Anthony did Fernandez Must Die on the C64. You learn something new every day. And over here you got some rapid fire questions by a bunch of industry people like Julian Rignall and Chris Hulsbeck. And if you look there, Mark invited me to ask Anthony one question, which melted my brain. I can't believe I'm in Zzap. And on the left there's my Chris Butler One Man is a Machine video. There's a still frame from it, super cool.
And I asked Mark, as a fan, what was it like to get that call to write again for Zzap 64?
Writing for the best Commodore 64 Gamers magazine is simply an honour. I grew up with Zzap. First issue came out in 1985, the year I left school at 16 years old. I'm 52 now and my words are being edited by Roger Keane, the founder of Newsfield and the editor of Zzap and Crash in the 1980s. And the new annuals, of course. If you told me as a kid that this was my future, well, I don't think I would have believed you.
And obviously, what was it like interviewing the great Anthony Crowther himself?
I'd actually met Tony Crowther about 2 years years before interviewing him for this new Zzap annual at a convention in the UK. He's a thoroughly fine chap, and I didn't sense the ego he would seem to project in the 1980s at all. He actually lives in a nearby town to myself. We're both from Yorkshire, and I'd grown up with Tony's games in the 1980s. He and Jeff Minter were the first two names I remember being credited to Commodore 64 games, and I followed his work right through my days with the Commodore, both as a game coder, and I followed his musical partnership and lifelong friendship with the late great musician Ben Dalglish. Following the release of the second Zzap annual, I was chatting to Chris Wilkins, and the subject of me being interested in working on an interview with Tony arose. I'd struggled to get this off the ground, but Chris swung it. It was happening. The plan was for me to get most of the interview in the can, and then for Mr. Wilkins and I to meet up and chat with Tony in a pub in his hometown and do some more stuff. Well, COVID-19 happened, and lockdown after lockdown, with travel restrictions being enforced across the whole country, prevented this from happening. But it has not affected the result, which I hope everyone will enjoy, which is Tony Crowther in Zzap 64 again. 36 years since he appeared in the very first edition in 1985 as a Commodore 64 wonder kid.
And something that people never ever mention when they look at these magazines or annuals is the adverts. I mean, look at this. Microprose. I mean, that just, that blew me away. Pirates, anybody? Yeah, I know it's a new one, but whatever. And when I used to read Zzap back in the day, I think the adverts were as important to me, and I spent as much time looking at them as I did the actual game reviews. It was something about it, the artwork. And yeah, you got a whole bunch of ones for obviously new things, new Commodore 64 stuff, which I thought was super cool. And finally, I asked my two guests one more question each. I first asked Chris, now that the quarterly Zzap 64 magazine has launched, are we going to see another annual ever again?
Well, as you know, Roger's been a big part of the relaunch of Zzap and creating the Zzap annuals, and he's been the editor, and he's actually been responsible for formatting every single annual that's taken place over the last number of years. There's been 3 in total. So going forwards, I guess we've got a number of options. We can continue doing an A4 annual, but have somebody else design, somebody else edit for the next one, or we could go A5 like we have with the magazine. So the A5 annual would be in line with the current brand, or we don't do an annual going forward, and we may do a Christmas special magazine. So I guess if we do an annual and there is an issue of Zzap magazine out towards the end of the year, the big question then what do we put in the annual? Is it a roundup of the year with more features? So there's a bit of a dilemma really, and the guys on the team, we're talking about this and trying to figure out what the roadmap is and the way forward. So I guess we just need to watch this space and see what the conclusion of these conversations are, and then what we actually do next.
And I asked Mark, in the future, maybe, are we ever going to see him add any articles to the quarterly magazine as well?
Well, that's the plan, but maybe not for the Commodore 64 Zzap, but for a planned Zzap Amiga magazine. All I can say at this stage is watch this space.
So overall, again, this is just a quality production, just like the newly released magazine. What I really like about this is that you can think of these annuals as kind of like tomes or like preservation of Commodore 64 games from the last decade. I know there are other fanzines and magazines out there that have printed versions of these video game reviews, so it's out there in the world somewhere. But it's nice to have this all in these annuals, because they pack a lot of reviews into each one. So you can think of all 3 of this trilogy of annuals really as a nice documentation of Commodore 64 gaming over the last 10 years. And I really like that. And if you want to find out anything more about this annual, I'll pass it over to Chris and he can tell you where you can pick it up.
You can get that on www.fusionretrobooks.com. I've got limited stock left because the sales of the annual has been really high since we sent out the annual back to the Kickstarters. Social media has been a frenzy really with people getting their annuals the last couple of weeks. So yeah, please do check the site. Love to hear what you guys think. You can leave a review on the site as well if you do buy the book. Hopefully you'll enjoy what we've done.
And finally, I'd just like to thank Chris Wilkins and Mark Hallowell for their input in this video to make it possible. Thank you very much. I'm Bastish B. I hope you enjoyed this. If you can please like and subscribe, that would be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.